Hello, everybody, and welcome to Signet Resources podcast. Today, I am joined, hopefully for the first of many, if I'm honest, I'm joined by Sarah Wilder from MPM Legal. Some of you will recognise her as she recently ran an IR35 seminar for us and actually made the topic of IR35 entertaining, which is no mean feat. But myself and Sarah have got together following that, and actually we started to look together at some of the impacts that affect us jointly in our markets. And one of those topics is flexible working. So we're just going to have a bit of a meander really and talk through sort of our opinions and hopefully give you some strategies for business to understand how to cope with the changes since COVID and see where this goes really. To pre-warn, although we are recording, I am at home. I live in Yorkshire. It is the Easter holidays. So my children have already disturbed us once, and I suspect it may happen again. And I have a Labrador. So I'm apologising in advance for anything strange, or if you see my eyes dart off to the right, it means I'm flapping my hand like this. But anyway, welcome, Sarah. That's my kind of excuses for anything going wrong. How are you?
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. I am pre-Easter holidays, but I've got one child at home sick who's downstairs with my husband, and I've got two cats who are sort of likely to suddenly start meowing halfway through just to put us off. So, but you know what? What better topic to talk about in the situation that we're both in than flexible working, right? I mean, this is life post-COVID.
This is, and you know what? I embrace it. I mean, I think I've told you about my background before, but I've worked from home now for almost 5 years, and it's been like a secretive life of children crawling under the table post 4 o'clock when I'm on a call to a client, or running outside of soft plays on a Friday because that was my day off, but I would still take calls. But then again, sort of trying to split that family and work divide, and suddenly I feel like I've come out in a degree, because I just say at the start of a call, I'm a working mum and there's kids and they might come in, but actually it doesn't impact my ability to do an incredibly good job in any way, shape or form. If anything, it makes me more efficient.
Oh, 100%. I think I've got two kids and I've definitely got more efficient for each child. I totally agree with you. I mean, it's been really interesting for me because before I had my oldest son, who's now 11, I'd worked in the city as a lawyer, and I'd moved in-house. I used to work in-house at Barclays as one of their employment lawyers. I looked after all the employment law issues that came out of the retail bank. So not a small job with 30,000+ employees and their issues coming up to me. And so I regularly worked anywhere between sort of 50 and 60 hours a week. That was a normal week for me, but I didn't have any kids. I lived really close by. My husband was also working in the city. We still had a really nice life. We went to the theatre, we ate out, all that stuff that we used to do pre-COVID, and probably in my case, much more pre-kids as well. And then I had Josh, and that sort of furtive half-life that you start to live. It's really, really interesting because I didn't want to be seen as one of those women, and I don't really know what I thought those women were, but I think when I look back, I realized that those women were just people who had something going on other than work. But I knew that there was, and bear in mind, I had my son sort of 11 years ago, and things, thank goodness, have changed for the better. But I knew that there was a view amongst some, not all, but some people that I work with and some leaders, that if you had a family, you weren't committed. And if you had something that pulled you away from your work, you weren't committed, and that for me led to some crazy situations. I once had to do a call with the CEO of the retail bank whilst feeding my child raisins, and thank God it wasn't a video call, because I had a 1-year-old and I was just feeding him raisins just at the perfect intervals that he wouldn't squawk, And I did say, look, I've got my son here, but even though I'd said I'd got my son here, I sort of didn't feel that it was acceptable that he should sort of move or breathe or make a noise. And I can remember another time when my youngest, Zach, was probably about 15 months, and he had chicken pox. And by that time, I was running a team that did all of the in-house tribunal litigation. And Zachary wouldn't sleep unless I was there. So I was working from home with him in a carry cot, and I was interviewing a witness to a really tricky employment tribunal claim. And he woke up and he was covered in in chickenpox. I mean, poor kid. And he just started screaming. And so I'm kind of trying to jiggle him. And then the guy who I'm talking to says, do you want to do this another time? And I was like, well, there isn't really another time. So if you can ignore him, so can I. and that was, that was how I had to operate. But it was always with this really deep fear that I was being judged and I somehow wasn't enough, despite being A-rated, top talent, etc., that I somehow wasn't enough because I had this other thing going on in my life. And I'd never got that before I had kids. I don't know if it was the same for you, but I just hadn't understood the other women who were in that position before that. And it did tend to be women, I know that's changing too.
But... I think that's tweaking slightly, but it's still, to me, it still feels very female orientated. And I actually remember in my 20s when I was a hiring recruiter, and I hate to say it, but probably not even unconsciously biased, probably quite consciously biased when we were recruiting for the team, always thinking that my biggest risk was recruiting people of 27, 28, 29, 30, because they may well go and have a family and I would lose them for 9 months. And if they came back, they'd never be the same again. Yeah. And then the ironic thing is, once I sorry, that was one of my children attempted to kill each other in the garden. And then as I, as I've matured into my 40s now, personally, if I was to look to the hiring market to hire to work for myself, a working mum is like my natural gravitas, because I think any parent who can juggle a driven role of a senior nature, client demands and childcare, and get the homework done, maybe not always in my case, and still cook dinner at night and still be there. It's so effective and so driven that why wouldn't you want that in your business? And for years, Signet, there's only one person in Signet that works full time. The rest of us work a combination of 3 to 4 day weeks, and we cover for each other, or we do take calls on our day off. And I know some companies would kind of go, oh, but it's their day off. But that's the flexible nature of the business that we work in, and we're all quite comfortable with it. I think years ago, it would have been this theory that you just wouldn't be as good. Whereas actually in recruitment, I think I ran more clients and billed more in terms of recruitment fees when I cut my hours down and cut out the faff of what I did. Because there's no water fountain talks with me, unfortunately. I don't check Facebook during the day. I don't answer calls from my mum. I do now, just in the hope she's coming to do something, anything. But I think the efficiency. But 20 years ago, I wouldn't have hired me.
No, and that's the challenge, isn't it? Because I wrote a piece on this recently, because I find myself getting really frustrated by this notion that if you have something in your life other than work, you're not committed to work. And I've also, because that's crazy, right? We've all got stuff in our lives other than work, whether it be children.
The argument that the work-life balance now is intense, and you see it's actually all over LinkedIn at the moment. Should we be considering a 4-day week? Are we more productive when we take breaks from our work? I use the analogy of, a marathon runner doesn't go out and run 26 miles every day to get better at running 26 miles. Some days they'll run sprints, some days they'll run a gentle 10 miler, other days they'll run a hard 6 miler. But they don't do the same thing, same amount. So is necessarily, and has COVID shown us, that working an 8-hour day, 5 days a week, is that demanding effectiveness, or is it demanding time? So perhaps if we view time more as a currency and allocate where we spend it, but also removing this notion that you should be grateful for a flexible opportunity, which I think has probably been built into, if you look at some senior people in their careers that, I've interviewed them, I'm quite happy to take a step back in order to get a day back. And you just think, why? And it does happen. I place people into that, male and female.
And that was, do you know what? That was something that always played on my mind, because I would have, my ideal would have been to work 3 days while my kids were small. But I never felt I could, because I could see how I could make it work for 4 days and retain my level of seniority. But I couldn't do the 3. And I'm okay with that. I've come to terms with that. I had to come to terms with it because I had to get on with it. But I feel sad about it, because I think back and I think, gosh, if only I'd had the maturity then that I have now to realise that it's not about the time that your bum is on a seat in an office. I mean, if it was, the country would be in an even worse state than it currently is economically. But actually, the amount of businesses that have just mobilised on the turn of a sixpence and gone, right, okay, we need to do things differently. And, you know, for office-based businesses like the ones that you and I sort of do a lot of work with, that has been working from home, working remotely. But actually, it's not just that. I think there have been other businesses, even, you know, some of my clients who are manufacturing businesses, for example, you know, they've really changed the way that they do things in order to be COVID compliant, and it's opened people's minds to flexible working. I mean, one of the things that I did a lot of as an in-house lawyer, particularly in my second role as an in-house lawyer, which was at Coca-Cola Enterprises, was to review flexible working requests. Because HR would look at them, but then they would come to me to see if, you know, everything they'd said was okay. And actually, there were a lot of times when I went back to HR and I said, look, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to make it clear to me why you don't think this works, because I can't see it, you know. And it was, people were a bit like, oh, okay. But I was like, I just think you need to open your mind, because you've come at this from a position that, oh, well, you know, they're not going to deliver. But why is that? If this person has always delivered, you know, if they're a good performer, if why is there this reluctance there? Now, I can understand the reluctance more if someone isn't performing well, and that's not to say that I think flexible working is, you know, like an award only for your best people.
A gift.
Exactly, but I do get that people feel more nervous about it if someone isn't performing, because it could potentially be another pressure point for them.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side of that is that it might not be. It might actually be the making of them, you know, because they want to make the arrangements work. But I always say to clients, just because someone doesn't work full time doesn't mean you can't performance manage them in exactly the same way that you would performance manage anyone else who isn't delivering. So there isn't a magic about this. There isn't a kind of, oh, you know, it's a bit of a jolly and we have to leave them alone. My very firmly held view is that for organisations to be profitable and to deliver what they need to deliver in the world that we're now living in post-pandemic, they have to be diverse. And where does diversity come from? In part, well, it comes from offering flexibility to people, because you attract a much broader range of talent if you have a much broader offering. And I think that the businesses that stick to a very rigid kind of 9 to 5 bums on seats type of approach, I think those businesses are going to get left behind, if I'm honest.
I agree, but I also think there's a balance, and I don't think we're there yet as an economy. And I think this is going to be the pain for the next 12 to 24 months, because, you know, we've got some of the big boys are putting big statements out there. You know, nobody's ever going to come back to the office. Was it TikTok that said it? Somebody, or Twitter?
Quite a lot of the tech companies have, quite a lot of the tech companies
you never need to come back. You know, your safety is paramount, which is a big blanket PR statement. From working in recruitment and understanding what happens with businesses when they need to induct new people, that actually there's very little that replaces that somebody sat next to you going, you do it this way. And we can screen share, we can get into people's living rooms, but I still don't feel we'll ever replace that kind of human, let's sit down and talk, let's see you struggle. And when you struggle, we will help. Because when you're left alone for hours, sitting at your dining room table or at your home office, if you're new and you don't realize something's not supposed to take that long, you'll only find out when you feed that back, and then you're losing manpower hours. So I think there's a huge place for the office, and certainly from talking to my clients, I've got some that are going, you know, we really want people back in. I've got others that are going, we will be flexible. From a recruitment point of view, the more flexible you can be, the more you open up your workforce. Lots of people have taken on second incomes in COVID, or they've diversified, or they've sat and reflected, like many of us, about what is important. And like most of us, you know, we don't lie in our coffin and go, God, I wish I'd worked harder.
No.
But, you know, like you and I, we're both very passionate about the work that we do. So actually, you know, somebody said, here's £1 million, Jane, you don't have to work anymore. I think you'd probably still find me creeping back into the office on Thursday morning going, well, I'm just going to do this. You know, that's a mindset. So I think when when we talk about flexible working with our clients from a recruitment point of view, and they go, I don't know if that would work for us, and these were conversations we had before. No, they've got to be in at 8 because we have a team meeting at 8:30, so they can't drop their child at school. So they eliminate part of the workforce that we're literally just asking for an extra hour. It's got to work. But again, I think, I missed the meeting on yesterday because it's half term here, Easter holidays, and everything's open. So my kids went paintballing, and it started at 9:30, which is the same scheduled time for our weekly catch up at Signet. That meeting's recorded. So anything that I needed to share with the team, I popped it in an email beforehand. And then actually, I think the general consensus is that I've not missed anything major, so I don't need to. But if not, I can just sit down and watch that while I eat my lunch later. What have I missed? What we're talking about? Technology has advanced so much, but I think for businesses now, certainly for the larger businesses, it's trying to work out that balance and almost getting past that. If I do it for them, I've got to do it for them. That's not necessarily the case, but as you said, it's also it can't be seen as a reward. If you hit target in sales and you do really well, we'll let you work from home 3 days a week. I mean,
it's not. No, I don't think that's a healthy way to be, because actually I think we've got to. So the model that we're working with in the workplace pre-COVID, let's be honest, it hasn't really changed since the Industrial Revolution, right? So it's a model that worked really well in a situation where you had a single income in a family, and you had someone else, and I don't make any, from my feminist standpoint, I don't make any assumptions as to whether that single income was from a male or a female, or even in a same-sex partnership or whatever. But you had someone earning the money and someone doing the caring. That was how things used to be, right up until the 50s, 60s, almost into sort of when I was a kid. Both of my parents worked, but my mum worked part-time until we were about till I was about 15 and my brother was 12. But that model, that doesn't really fit with modern life either, because the education system is such that men and women are equally represented at university, so the workforce at the start is pretty much an even split. And I don't know about you, but we couldn't afford to pay our mortgage if only one of us worked. So most people are going to be in that situation. So if that's the case, and then you bring into that as well, right, okay, so you've got two partners working, and then you've got the fact that often people will aspire to have a family and to have kids, and this isn't just a family thing, and it's not just a women thing, and I get very cross when people say it is, but the simple fact is the model that we had pre-COVID, it just doesn't work for modern life. It's a model that's completely in denial about how people live and what people need to do to earn a living. And I think the beauty of this position we're in now is we don't have to fit a workplace into a pre-COVID model. So it doesn't have to be, oh, well, we normally do 9 to 5, but we'll do 9:30 to 5 just to be a bit more flexible. You have a blank sheet of paper potentially as a business. You can completely rewrite things, and you can go for, what do we need as a business? So it's quite possible that we really feel like we need some collaboration time, and we can do some of that online actually, but actually once a month, let's say, we think it'd be really great to have a day where everyone gets together, and we don't try and do any fee earning work. It is purely a day to collaborate and innovate and create. That's amazing, right? And a model where you have kind of hubs where that kind of stuff can happen. So offices act as hubs, and kind of you then have your spokes, if you will, going off with people working from home or people working in regional centres or whatever it is. You can tell from the way I'm talking, I just find that so exciting because it's new and it's different.
Yeah.
And I think the really dangerous trap that we're going to fall into post-COVID, if we're not careful, is we're either going to go back to the status quo because it's easy, or we're going to, and it's familiar and it's comfortable.
And we're already hearing people say, when we get back to normal.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas I'm not sure, I mean, I don't want to go back to normal if normal is bums on seats 9 to 5 as a
I'd hate it if my kids have to crawl under the table again.
Well, especially if they, as they're getting bigger, it's going to be a bit awkward. They're not going to fit.
Well, exactly. And they get louder as well as they get bigger.
And I won't go back to that is the truth. I won't go back to that. And that's not me sort of announcing that to my managing partner on your podcast. It's just recognised. I mean, we're a small business, right?
Did you know this before you came on this?
Yeah, I'm pretty vocal about these things. It won't surprise you to know that. But I think for my clients who are much larger businesses than ours, I'm kind of saying to them, look, this is an opportunity, and we can talk on further podcasts if people are interested about where the opportunities lie and about inclusion and diversity and how you can completely reframe how you do things. But I mean, what you've just described about how Signet deal with their team meeting, it's brilliant. So we recognise that people need to know information. We recognise that not everyone can make it all the time. So we're going to, have a system in place that means that information is still disseminated in an appropriate way.
Without taking up, so I think the fear previously with flexible workers has been that repeating of information. So they couldn't make the meeting because they don't work Thursday. So actually on a Friday we have a meeting to discuss the Thursday's meeting. Is when you kind of go, actually, if I've got a workforce of 100 and 10 don't work Mondays, 10 don't work Wednesdays, how am I going to continue to get that information? And also when you do work, so if we call flexible working, if we call it back in the olden days, part-time working or less hours, is it unrealistic to think in those less hours, they're going to have to watch a meeting that might be an hour long?
Yeah.
My argument is probably yes, because if you worked on that day, you'd be in the meeting anyway. But also there might be some lead from line managers where they go, do you know what, yesterday's meeting actually wasn't any relevance to you whatsoever. So watch it if you like, but if not, you can probably carry on with your life as normal. It's just that fluidity. But I mean, you describe it as an opportunity. I've got clients describing it as a challenge. So it depends which way your glasses fall. A bigger corporation suddenly going, right, how do I move forward? Because we are seeing, from a recruitment point of view, I am seeing talent say, I will not do this. I'm also, but then, case study wise, I've just recruited a marketing manager on a 6-month contract based in London, and the hope is they will go into the office in London. It's a property-based business, so it does make a lot of sense for them to go from the office. However, I scoured the talent pool around London and didn't find anybody that I felt was appropriate. So re-spoke to the client and said, realistically, do they have to come into the office, or realistically, can we take them from, I live in Yorkshire, I travel to London, it's an hour and a half on the train, and it's a far pleasanter journey than when I lived in Reading and commuted to London, which was a hell of a train journey with 8,000 other people. It's a beautiful train journey now, AirPods in, laptop on, work on the way down, read on the way home. In fact, I miss it. But spoke to the client, and actually, to be fair to the client, I think it was more me that put the perception on that they needed to be based in London. He went, look, the job's been done from home for last year, crack on. So we placed somebody from North Yorkshire who's actually said, I'm quite desperate to get back in the office, so when that time comes, I'll go down and I'll spend a week. I've got friends, I'd love to go and have a week in London. Then that's the element of choice. And I think when you give choice to an empowered workforce, as much as I dislike the word empowered, you create an engaged workforce. An engaged workforce is a passionate workforce, and a passionate workforce will work harder to get things done and be more efficient. And that's what you get by. And some people won't want to work a 4-day week or a 3-day week. They might just want the flexibility of working from home on a Friday, or it's sports day. I mean, God, sports day for 20 years, all I can ever think about is, friends that have gone, I can't do sports day because I've got to work. You always think, come on now, it's one day a year and we all do it. And it's and same as the nativity plane, no parent should have to skip a couple of hours because they had to go in the office. Whereas set up from home at 8 o'clock, work till 2, go and watch your kid run around and throw balls in a hoop, and then come home at 4 and pick up any emails in the evening if needs be. Or you shouldn't have to use a day of annual leave for a 2-hour event.
You shouldn't have to pretend that you're something you're not in the workplace. And I've read all sorts of commentary and studies that say you get the best out of your people when you get the whole of them. And you don't get the whole of them if they're pretending that, their kids aren't around, or they don't have kids, or whatever it is. You actually get far more from people if they are able to feel safe, psychologically safe, to be themselves in the workplace, whatever that means. And that can be, we're specifically talking about flexible working and coming back to parents and stuff today, but it's not just that. It's someone who wants a day a week because they feel really strongly about climate issues and they want to volunteer somewhere. Do you know what I mean? And it's that ability to be yourself and not feel that you have to pretend. Because I know from my own experience, at my rather unsuccessful attempts of pretending, when my kids were little, it's exhausting, and it's exhausting
it
enough
really is.
when you're trying to juggle more than one thing anyway, and then when you're
The
also
guilt
trying to
of taking-
pretend to
guilt
be
of taking a
perfect.
day off. You know, I mean, I work flexibly across 5 days, which is my choice. But I work with some clients who now just put it on the out of office. You know, you'll only catch me on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And it, you know, to me, and I think to anybody now, but I think the last 12 months have made that easier. Before, it would have been a bit like, well, what do I do then? What it's Thursday and I need you. What do I do? Do I just keep ringing you and hope that you answer me? Whereas now that kind of expectations, because realistically, there's very little that can't wait if you actually need that one person, that expert, if somebody's that good. But after that, then there's normally a company behind them again. Or somebody might just go, you know what, I want to work a 4-day week because I want to work a 4-day week. My work-life balance.
Doesn't have to be any other reason than that. And actually the law says that as well. I mean, there's no right to flexible working enshrined in the law, but there is a right to request. And the right to request doesn't require that you have a reason. It used to be that you had kids and you had childcare responsibilities, and then it was extended to carers. And now it's not. It's just you can ask after you've been there for 26 weeks. My top tip, I guess, if we're thinking about tips, and I talked earlier about businesses and how they could maybe start to see this as an opportunity, but just thinking about it from a candidate perspective, my top tip on that is, if you want to work flexibly, as you've said, and I think talent is doing this now, I wouldn't wait until you're in there. I'd make it part of your, you know, part of your kind of USP almost, as look, this is what I offer and this is how I offer it. And I think the beauty of where we are now is that I think most companies, not all sadly, but most companies are just so much more open to that.
And set up. I think a lot of the key issues we had before was actually, you know, I remember the recruitment industry, interestingly enough, we're not a massive laptop marketplace, we're desktops. So when COVID hit, you know, you had hundreds of recruiters, mainly in the city, but you had hundreds of recruiters walking around with no access to dial in from home. And consequently, you know, as we were fighting to sort of, you know, obviously the recruitment industry was hit really hard by COVID in the first month. So as people were fighting to try and keep their clients understand what's going on, they're also doing it without any form of technology. Whereas there are very few businesses now that aren't set up for their staff to work remotely. And I think as employers, we need to embrace that and really push our boundaries. And again, recruitment wise, does this person need to be based 20 miles from the office? Or actually, for somebody that is bang on the money of what I want, you know, can they live in Newcastle and work in Bracknell? And what does that look like? You know, we're a very, very small country.
Exactly. We think we're not, but my uncle lives in the States and we definitely are. So I suppose, Jane, where would you, I mean, I suppose I've got some thoughts to finish on about kind of, and it's hopeful. These are hopeful thoughts for businesses. And I get the point about challenges for sure. I'm not blind to this, but I think that flexibility is so positive. I guess my first point would be a challenge to your clients and mine who see this as a challenge in a very supportive way, to say, what about reframing it? What about seeing it as an opportunity? What about looking at that blank sheet of paper and thinking, okay, this isn't just about how people work. This is about my talent strategy. How am I going to change this around? What about recognizing things like, okay, well, we've got junior people who need supervision. Yes, some of that we would like to be in the office, but we should be able to innovate and create new ways of using the technology we have to create new practices that enable them to get that, you know, in a way that they feel safe and they feel they're learning. So I think the takeaway for me is this really is an opportunity. It's not just people like me standing on their soapbox, banging their drums about working mums and working parents anymore. This is an amazing opportunity for businesses if they choose to take it.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. And I can only see how it can pay dividends in, you know, in talent acquisition market and coming together there, which concludes us nicely. And I think also, Sarah, which I'm up for if you are, leads us to potentially another podcast in a couple of weeks. Let's get the Easter holidays out of the way for both sides. But I think what I'd like to lead on to and discuss is talking about age in the workforce, because I think one thing that we've sort of tampered on there a little bit is once you've had a parental workforce that either leaves the workforce or comes back, we obviously come back older and wiser. I would like So why is there still a perception in them? And we're not going to delve into it now. I'm going to leave you to think on it because
no, let's do it. 100%. I mean, something else I'd quite like to talk to you about whilst we're sort of making our wish list is you know, the impact of specifically of the pandemic on women, and what kind of some of the things we can do about that as well. So I think we're ripe for a good few podcasts yet.
Yes. So you heard it here first. So hopefully, if you have enjoyed this podcast, it would be lovely for you to let us know. We're both new to this world, so it's always nice to get feedback, but also your thoughts. You know, your thoughts from a business perspective, your thoughts as an employee, your thoughts as an employer. And we will obviously publish when we're going to go live with our next podcast, so you can tune in and listen. And yeah, we'll look at age, and then we will look at the role of women, because that sounds like one we're both going to have a lot of opinions on. But to everybody, thank you very much for listening. Our bios will be up at the end. You can see a little bit more about myself and Sarah. And you know, in the classic words of the pandemic, stay safe, and we will see you soon.